am I going to stay in direct service and sort of work one-on-one with kids, or do I want to go in a different direction, do more program work, do more public policy work? And so that is where I decided to go. I went in a different, like, programmatic policy direction. And that's really the nonprofit sector. That's a lot of what the nonprofit sector does. They are providing programs for communities. They are working on advocacy and policy issues at the local, state, federal level. Um, there's just so much that you could do. And there are so many, like, there's a nonprofit for everybody. If you care about something, there is a nonprofit or probably 25 that are working on that thing. And
Right.
that gave me a lot of breathing room. I had experience with kids. After a few different nonprofit roles, um, I ended up in public policy work for children, youth, and families. And a lot of that was data collection, analysis, reporting to sort of identify what the problems were in communities, figuring out what the best solutions were going to be based on the needs and everything that we would be hearing, and make those recommendations to whoever we needed to listen. If that's policymakers, if that's local councils, whoever it is. So I think being in the nonprofit sector, understanding how to use data can really do a lot of good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity there to work in all kinds of different issues.
Yeah. And I'll say that that's such a kind of a dichotomy from, from my background where I've worked so heavily in the enterprise sector and mid-market, and um, where it can be a little soul sucking, right? Because you're serving profit for profit companies,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, on the other side, you have you who's working with nonprofits who, like you said, they're the do-gooders, right? They're the people that are getting out there and trying to help people and communities. And um, it, so, do you find a lot of reward, emotional reward, kind of on that side of things, working with nonprofits?
I think you can. I think a lot of people come into the sector because of that emotional reward. Um, I worked in child welfare and juvenile justice for a while.
Mhm.
Those are pretty challenging policy areas to be in.
Yeah.
So I think if you are somebody who's interested in the sector and you're going into, if you're doing mental health stuff, if you're doing certain kinds of youth stuff, you do kind of have to be prepared to um,
See
sort of
silence.
process a lot of the emotions that might be
Oh, I
coming up.
lost your audio.
Oh, something is buzzing, but I don't know what.
Oh, there you are. You're back now.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I was just saying, if you're somebody who goes into an issue that can be a little on the traumatic side,
Mhm.
you do kind of have to prepare for or have coping mechanisms to kind of process the emotional overwhelm that might happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
yeah,
even on the data side, you're having to see and read
yeah,
those responses from surveys and see that data that's coming through. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I'd imagine that that could be incredibly traumatic.
yeah.
Yeah. So my wife's a therapist, so I get that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep,
It's
yep,
that can be incredibly hard just to see that data.
yeah,
Um, that's awesome. But incredibly rewarding when you see kind of the other side, right? That
yep.
you're helping these communities and these people move through these situations. And
Hmm.
uh,
Absolutely.
so that's awesome. That's awesome. For those of you that have joined us, this is Lindsay. She's the data coach. She works with nonprofits. We're going to be talking a little bit about what that's like. And if you have any questions, put them down in the chat. We're going to get to those questions as we kind of move through uh, our discussion, and super excited that you're here tonight with us. Um, so tell me a little bit about how you became the data coach. Like, where did that title come from, and how did you decide to launch your business?
Yeah. Um, So I mentioned a little earlier, when I started in the nonprofit sector, I wore a bunch of different hats, which is very common when you're working in the nonprofit sector. So I was a database manager for like the fundraising teams. I did program management for a little while, even though I did not know how to run a program. Uh, it's fine. And it eventually came into this sort of public policy analyst role. And typically, for the kinds of organizations I worked with, I was the only data person on staff.
Yeah.
So if there was any kind of data related question, uh, people were coming to me, which has its pros and cons, right?
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of my job as an analyst was, going out to, legislative meetings and working with folks to say, like, this is the data we've collected on this issue. These are what the problems are. These are the recommendations that we're making. And a lot of the times when I'd be out in the world kind of doing those presentations and the advocacy work, somebody would come up to me at the end and say, wow, I really wish we had a data person on staff, but we don't have the time, we don't have the budget, I can't get my executive director on board with it, whatever it is. And sort of over time, I noticed that groups kind of fell into these three categories of like, we have no data culture and we're not interested. Okay, cool. Um, there's some kind of data culture, but the demands for data are coming from outside people, outside stakeholders. So the nonprofit's not doing it for themselves. They're doing it because the funders are saying, we need a report from you quarterly. And then there's lots of organizations that are really excited to do more with their data, but they're just limited. They don't have the time. There's no resources. They don't really know where to start, things like that. So the data coach kind of came from seeing this need of like, there's a lot of organizations that can use this kind of help. So how can I use the skills that I've developed over time to step in and, be your data analyst for a quarter to work on a project you've been meaning to do? How can I come in and help you organize all the data you have so like where everything is? um, and I wanted to include the coach piece because I wanted to do an education and training component,
Okay.
which has largely been through, launching the YouTube channel earlier this year, um, doing workshops at local conferences, things like that.
And I will say, for those of you that have joined us, Lindsay has an awesome YouTube channel as well. It's slowly growing. That's how I found Lindsay. Is saw her channel. I'm always kind of keeping an eye out for new data channels, anyways. And there's not a ton out there of people really talking, and so was super excited to see Lindsay and really talking to people, like not talking at people, really trying to help
Mhm.
people understand. And so that's really what kind of turned me on to your channel, uh, and why I wanted to kind of bring you on too. So that's awesome. So tell me a little bit about you kind of talked about why you work with nonprofits and some of the stories. So we're gonna skip over that part of the question. So what does a typical well, actually, I want to go back to kind of what you mentioned just a little bit ago. Uh, Based on kind of what you're talking about there, do you find your work to be seasonal uh, when you're working with nonprofits because of kind of that, hey, we need you now, but not later, um, and how do you work with those types of situations?
I think for me, it hasn't been terribly seasonal. And I think that's just because organizations have different seasons,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So if you're kind of an education based nonprofit, you're going to be crazy busy in the school year and you might have some downtime in the summer.
Yeah.
If you're an environmental nonprofit, um, you might just be going year round. It just sort of depends.
Sure.
And because I am open to lots of different kinds of nonprofits, um, it doesn't so much affect my schedule, um, but certainly theirs. And it's something that we have to be mindful of
Yeah.
as we plan out projects.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about what a day in the life looks like for you as a data professional in this space.
So when I was working in the sector, um, my days could vary widely. And that's because, I tended to work with smaller to like mid-sized organizations. And there's very much an attitude of like, we're all chipping in. So your job might be research analyst, data analyst, but we've got an event that we have to table in the community this afternoon. So do your Excel magic in the morning, and then we got to get on the bus because we got to go, you know, do outreach at whatever local festival is happening.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that is something to be aware of if you're interested in being in the sector. Um, it's you have your job role, but sometimes you're going to be pitching in to help with other stuff. Um, that's why I know how to organize a gala. I'd rather not do it again.
Right. Right. You do kind of get pulled in when you work, and I think it's the same when you work for a small business too.
Yeah, yeah.
As a data person, because I worked for a small business for a little bit, and they did construction of cell sites, of like the cell towers and stuff. And sometimes, 90% of the time, 70% of the time, I was doing, data work, helping
Yeah.
them, pull together construction schedules and combine their invoices with their quotes and what their construction schedule was, and
Yep.
kind of forecast when things were going to be, paid out and when income was coming in. But there was that other 30% of the time when a truck showed up with material, with antennas and coax, that I was out back helping unload the truck because I was one of the bigger guys in the office, and they're like,
Mhm.
"You look like somebody that could carry this stuff. Come in and help
Yeah.
us."
Yep.
And so sometimes you get pulled into doing those things,
Yeah.
even in small businesses. And so
Yeah.
uh, you're the data person, right? Like,
Yes.
you're the one data
The
person.
the
Uh,
um again, and that's for, your smaller organizations. I think it's important to remember that nonprofits are not a monolith.
yeah.
So like your major hospital that's near you is probably a nonprofit organization.
Mhm.
Your universities, your colleges. So those are kind of different animals. Um, but for the folks that I work with, now that I'm more of a partner as opposed to an employee,
Yeah.
I have a little more control of the reins in terms of the kind of work I do. They can't get me in the van to go do the event downtown. Um,
Yes.
so it's a lot of what I end up doing is um, a lot of data analysis work. Do a lot of work with surveys, with interviews, with focus groups. Sometimes that's analyzing just the transcripts. The work has already been done and they're sending it to me. Other times we're kind of starting from scratch, or I'm they will give me the questions they think they want to ask, and I will work with them to maybe do some revisions, get some clarity, make sure they're getting the data that they actually need.
Yeah.
Um, I have a couple organizations we're working on data governance, policies, getting them basic data dictionaries together, trying to resolve some of their data fragmentation problems, which is a huge issue for
Yeah.
reasons we can get into. But yeah, so lots of data analytics and lots of data organizing almost.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that kind of that data fragmentation that you talk about happens with I mean, with
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah,
I see it. I see it in enterprises. I see it in, SMBs, and you're seeing it with nonprofits. I think that that's hey, I'd love to hear what your take is on how and why that happens, from your perspective.
I think it happens for a lot of reasons. I think, well, two big ones are that organizations tend to choose software and tools based on the immediate problem that is in front of them that we need to fix, and what can we do on the cheap.
Mhm. Yeah.
So one example sort of might be the communications department needs a different system for managing all of their email addresses. So they kind of go off and look at some tools and make decisions about what they want to use, only to later find out that, oh, we actually needed to talk to the fundraising database that we spent $1 million on 5 years ago, but we don't actually know how to do that. Um, so, well, it was cheap, or it's what we've got for now. We don't have time to kind of look into something different. Um, and that sort of the silos between departments sometimes can contribute to the silos with the data. If every little team is doing their own thing and there's no cohesive strategy, um, that's where things can get really messy, especially as an organization grows.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'll say, I'll just want to talk about this from the enterprise, kind of the
Yeah,
different
yeah.
perspective from the enterprise standpoint. It's actually very different as to why I see it happen. I think from an enterprise standpoint, as they purchase other companies, as they,
Mm,
integrate other companies into their business, um, they're integrating those other tools that oftentimes these are SMBs or they're mid-market that are being purchased by some conglomerate like AT&T or T-Mobile, or we see the Salesforce and Informatica integration
mhm,
this
mhm.
this past couple weeks. um you know and then they have to figure out how to integrate those tools that those companies have purchased, a lot of them off the shelf, but also a lot of them some homegrown applications, right?
Mhm.
You see it's these homegrown applications, and then you have to you know either get them to transition off those applications,
Yep.
or you have to figure out how to integrate those applications. And I saw that with when AT&T purchased Alien Vault. They were on
Mhm.
AWS, we were on Azure, and we had to one of my big projects was migrating that AWS account into Azure, into AT&T's Azure account. And so it, I think that so it's different with enterprises.
Yep.
But I think it's probably similar with mid market and SMBs, where they're doing what they can to get by, to move
Mhm.
forward, and they integrate these tools and resources. Sometimes, a lot of those don't have a data person,
Yeah.
and so they're they don't have that knowledge and that background to understand. Oh, I need this tool to be able to talk to this tool,
Mhm. Mhm.
and how are we going to get all of this to talk to each other? And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
When you mentioned, sort of homegrown apps, it made me think. I was doing some reading, academic reading, like the nerd that is sitting before you, um, about sort of challenges nonprofits face with data. And one term that gets thrown around every once in a while is the homebrew database,
Oh,
meaning, yes, okay, so we have some things in spreadsheets, and then we maybe have one database that we use for something. Also, there are paper files in the storage room that haven't been looked at
right.
in 5 years, but should be a part of the overall system.
Yeah.
So the data fragmentation can come down to things like paper files that just haven't been, put into an
Integrated.
electronic system.
Yeah. I worked with a chiropractor, a small, just local chiropractor, and like that was what I did for him. Was I did a lot of data entry. I built a custom system for his business, and he sat me in a room, and I had a stack of files beside me from the floor probably 3 feet up of,
Jeez.
okay, I need you to start putting these into the system. And this was, Lord, this was probably 17 years ago. So we didn't have a lot of the tools that we have now,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
where now you could probably scan all those in and load them into a file, and even like more recently in the last couple of years, probably use AI to just read
Mhm.
those files and put them into like a CSV that you could easily load somewhere. Uh, and then even like today, you have in enterprises that stray marketing team that's been using an MS Access database for 10 years to do their
Not access.
reporting, right? Uh, and enterprises still run into that. I'm sure that you probably see that in
Mhm.
nonprofit too, because MS Access is something people are like, "Oh, hey, this is cool. I could use this for my database,"
Yeah,
right?
it's there, it's
And
there.
it's there, and then they hit a million rows, and they're like, why is this not working anymore? So yeah, that's too funny. Yeah, homegrown. That when you say homegrown too, like that's the vision that I have in my head, is that salesperson or that MS Access or that
Mhm.
marketing person that's figured out, I could use Access and just create my own things.
Have you found a lot of reluctance or some reluctance to letting go of those systems?
Oh yeah,
In that, like, "But this has worked for so long, why do I have to change that
yes,
now?" Yeah.
yes, absolutely. That and these massive like 5 GB Excel files that are gigantic and take
Mhm.
10 minutes to open, and they're like, no, this is the thing that I have to live, like I
Yeah,
need this daily.
yeah,
And then you show them Power BI and they're like, it refreshes in like a second, really,
yeah,
holy cow.
yeah.
And so yeah, there's a lot of reluctance because they just don't want to let go. There's some of it's control, some of it's peace of mind, some of
Yeah,
it's just familiarity. But yeah.
I think sometimes it's overwhelmed too,
Mhm.
especially if you're trying to redo a lot of systems at once.
Oh yeah,
Um, so it's a lot of, like, baby steps. Like, "Let's look at this one thing first."
it is. And for enterprises, I don't know if it's like this in nonprofits, but like there's some reluctance to give it up because they think that they're giving up their job. Um,
Mm,
right. For bigger companies, they don't want to give up that access database or that Excel file because they feel like this is it's almost become what they do for their full-time job.
yeah, yeah, a little bit of, like, "Well, that's my baby."
That's my,
Like,
yeah,
I birthed it, I raised it, you're
yeah,
not taking it away from me. Yeah, yeah.
very much so, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some of that as well. Um, Especially if you are the one person, right? You've been responsible for all of this for so long. Sometimes hearing from an outside person like, "Hey, maybe we could do this a little bit differently," is met with some resistance.
Yeah. It's funny. You come in as a data person sometimes, and you're like, oh, I could automate this, and we can make it so you don't have to do all that work anymore. And it's the same fear that you see in people's eyes when you talk about AI now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it's it's not all that different. So when people are
Mhm.
like, AI is coming for your job, I'm like, they told me I was coming for their job 10 years ago. I don't
Oh,
understand what the difference is. So
yeah. Yeah.
cool. So we'll move on to the from this subject a little bit. I could talk about get wrapped up in that a little bit also. But um, so tell me, are there any misconceptions that you often hear about data work in the nonprofit field that you work in?
I think it depends on what you think of when you think of a nonprofit organization. There may
Mhm.
be assumptions that nobody knows what they're doing with their data and nobody, you know, the people don't care or they just have too many other things going on. But again, there's such a wide range of nonprofit organizations. Where I have been, yeah, I'm the only person who knows what the data is and maybe the only person who's used Excel on a regular basis. That's fine, that happens. Um, but I think there are a lot of opportunities too if you are interested in being in the sector in places like colleges and universities, large foundations. I don't think that the Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation has
Mhm.
the same data problems
Right.
as, the two-person education nonprofit that I worked at a million years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Melinda's not trying to find people to do data for her. She's
she's
yeah.
good. And she's
Yeah.
trying to find people, but it's going to be more than one person
Mhm.
because they have the money to do
Yeah.
that. um,
Exactly.
as I wildly speculate about the Gates Foundation. Um,
Yeah. Sorry, if anybody out there
right.
from the Gates Foundation's listening, sorry, we're not
Please,
being derogatory.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different things, which may not enter the thought process if you're just thinking about like, oh, they're small organizations and they're going to need all these different things. It really depends. So, as a data person, sort of whatever your expertise if there are places that you are interested, do the deep dive, do the research, see how big their staff is. You can always do informational interviews if you're curious. Some places will have a pretty substantial IT department. Some places do not have one, and it's not on the radar. Other places might contract out with an outside vendor to take care of their IT needs for them. So it's I can't really think of specific data misconceptions, but just know you're working with a wide array of needs, a wide array of resources, and probably a wide array of interest in getting a handle on data and using it in a way to show that the organization is getting toward their mission.
And kind of to that point, I want to ask you, when you're talking to nonprofits to not sell your wares or anything, but when you're talking to nonprofits to try to explain to them what that benefit is of kind of pulling those insights out of their data, who do you talk to? Like,
Mm.
who in those kind of organizations are you talking to try and encourage them to be more data driven, or to kind of use the data that they have in front of them?
So I am talking to a lot of program coordinators, program directors. Um, I don't frequently work with executive level folks,
Okay.
um, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why I end up speaking with more on the ground people is because they're closer to the information.
Hmm.
And so they're going to pick up any issues or any problems before somebody on an executive level is going to see them.
That makes sense.
So, you're somebody who's running training programs for your employees and your feedback survey is not getting you what you're looking for, but you don't know how to get what you're looking for exactly, that's someone who would come to me and say, "Can you help us figure this out? Like, how do we get the information that we need to do a better job
Yeah.
and, offer better professional development to our staff people?"
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, and there's a little bit of dichotomy there too between that and enterprise, and it's different from enterprise to mid market too. When I'm looking at mid market type customers,
Mm.
uh, from a consulting standpoint, enterprises, I'm talking more that VP, director, VP, and higher
Mhm.
level, and then the mid market is a little bit closer to what you're talking about, where I'm talking with program managers, or I'm talking with kind of managers, or maybe up to directors, and then above that, then kind of it starts to fade away, right? That
Yeah.
conversation starts to just get the glazed look over their eyes. But yeah, okay, that's awesome. We do have a question that I want to address real quick. What is one skill you use daily in your workspace?
Communication.
I love that.
Communication.
Eh, and that's something, for those of you that have been on my shows before, my live sessions in particular, that's something that I push with aspiring data engineers, is how important those soft skills are, and being personable, just being able to have a conversation with somebody and not talk over their head, right?
Yes.
That you're
Yes.
talking to them and not at them, and you're actually listening. I think
Yes.
it's such an important
Yes.
piece.
I, you know, I work with a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. So, if you're here and you're on this call, you probably already have the incredible technical skills that you need to be amazing in whatever workplace that you choose to go to. In the nonprofit sector, it's really, really important to make sure you understand the jargon
Mm.
of the organization you're with. Make sure you're asking why a lot. Tell me why this thing is important to you. Okay, tell me why this is a priority area. What about this thing instead? It's a lot of making sure you're on the same page because how I interpret something might be different how you interpret something. And so before we launch a big project together, we've we've got to establish our shared common language, and that could take a lot of time. Um,
I was always told, like, early in my working career, I went through leadership training, and it was called peeling back the onion, right?
Mhm.
And that we were always told you need to ask why at least 5 times before you get to what the real root cause is of any type of situation. And so that's such an important, I think that's such an important skill. And it's, it's transient, right? You take
Mhm.
that skill with you wherever, whatever career you go to. Having that communication skill and having that understanding of asking why, and really getting to that root cause and not just taking things at surface level. And so important in the data world, I think, um,
Mhm.
because when you're dealing with stakeholders, they so often don't understand what they're really asking or
Yes.
what they're really wanting out of what they're asking. And you have to ask why a few times to get them
Mhm.
to open up. Um,
Yep.
and it's not that they don't know what they're talking about. It's that they do know what they're talking about. They've done it. They've been in it for so long that they've forgotten all these little pieces are in every corner of what they're
Yeah.
doing.
Yep. It's a little bit like investigative work.
It is. It is.
Um,
You're a data detective.
you kinda are. And the success of those conversations is gonna dictate the success of your project.
Yeah.
So as much as you can do upfront, the better. I also try to be very mindful of not overwhelming people.
Hmm. Yeah.
Folks in this sector often don't have enough staff on board to do the 8,000 things they need to do. Um, Pay isn't always great. Again, depends on the organization. We're already stressed. We're already stressed. And so to have some like data nerd come in and start talking technical at you, you lost them, right?
Yeah.
They're done. They're like, this has nothing to do with me trying to save children. So again, the kind of language that you use, asking them a lot of questions, like you'll get to your stuff later, but building relationships and making sure that you know people can trust you to communicate clearly with them is going to go a long way.
I always found that that sitting down with somebody and watching what they do went so much further than any like requirement gathering meeting that I ever did, right?
Yep.
Um, there's something about sitting down with somebody and watching what they do that shows them that you care, right?
Yeah.
There's some truth to that. Nobody cares what you know until they know that you care, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's true in the data space too. And it's true in big companies too. Uh, you know, as a data person walking into a new project, uh, especially finance is really bad about this, right? Finance groups have so much love and passion for what they do.
Hmm.
And I think it's probably the same in nonprofit. They have so much love and passion for the work that they're doing that somebody else coming in to try and help is seen as a hostile takeover.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's so important. Awesome. Um, so thank you, Nikhil, for asking that question. That was a great question.
Yes. Thank you.
Um, so I think accidentally skipped down. Uh, how do you approach building data solutions when organizations have tight budgets?
Sometimes nonprofits don't necessarily realize the data solutions they already have.
Mm.
And that kind of goes back to the data fragmentation piece. Um, when you've got a lot of like piecemeal programs and tools that you're using, and you don't necessarily know the full extent of their capabilities, um, you could be missing out on things that are already in house. So I do try to, when they're open to it, work with organizations on an inventory and a little bit of mapping of
Okay.
like, okay, what kinds of data do you collect? How does it get into the organization? Where does it need to go? And let's look into, you have a Salesforce database. Could we be doing something to make it work better for you? I have Salesforce trauma. I will admit that.
Yeah, I think we all. If anybody's been in the
Yeah.
data realm too long, yeah, you do. Yeah.
I did I did a transition for one of my organizations from an admittedly bad data system to Salesforce. And I think I'm still recovering from that.
There needs to be a support group. Yeah.
There does need to be a support group. But there's a lot of times already a lot on board. So that's kind of where I try to start with them. And each organization has its budget, right? If we need to make do with what we can, then we'll do it. Thank you. I love being validated.
You're right. It's so important to feel validated.
It really is. It really is. So it's a lot of what do we have that we can work with, and then we can talk about sort of what is your budget if there's something really important that's missing. Let's look into tools that organizations similar to yours might be using that can benefit you and get you closer to what you need.
Awesome. So the next thing I want to talk about is what kind of trade-offs do you have to make, and how do you help clients to prioritize, especially with budget constraints, and some of them probably have so much. I know from my side, sometimes you walk into a project and they're like, I have all these ideas, right? They're so excited. They've got, have this opportunity and they have all these ideas, and you have to kind of get them to funnel that down into what their priorities are.
Right. So I think a lot of organizations do have a sense when they come to me about what their most important data problem is. What's challenging in the nonprofit sector is there's a bit of tension between the data that other people want from you versus the data you want for yourself. So, and I personally, my bias here is that I care more about what the nonprofit wants for itself. How can it use what it has to track the success of the programs, to write a really great grant proposal to a foundation using data that they've collected over time, right? Like that's where I would prefer to focus. But also, listen, you got to give the funders what they want, right? Like we need the money to survive. So part of that prioritizing is getting clear on, all right, what's being required of you? What parts of that required data can actually be useful to you? And then how do we fill in the rest? Okay. One thing that nonprofits sometimes, come into conflict with their funders is that the information the funders want is not at all helpful to the nonprofit organization. So it's just like an extra task on top of all the other things that you have to do. So how do we kind of make room for that? Because you got to do it. Sucks, but you got to do it. But also making sure that we're prioritizing what those key questions are that you have about your organization that you need answers to be successful. Awesome. It's a lot of me asking, what questions do you want to answer? And why is that question important? And I do that ad nauseum until they are tired of me.
I think that question of why is this question important is so incredibly just intrinsic to what we do as data people. It's so important to ask. And I think that it's something that especially juniors, or especially people that are, early in the space, that are kind of young in the space, don't think about. They get a requirement. They're like, okay, this is what the business asked for. Let's do it.
Yep.
Without taking that time to ask, why is this important? What needle are we moving by answering this question? And so, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was
just going to say you get even more incredible information if you have an opportunity to ask that of the entire staff.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes we're only asking the executive director and the VPs or whoever, your leadership. But making space for the folks on the ground to say, hey, tell me what you want to know about this place. How would that help you in your job? Why is that important to you? Why do you think that needs to be included in whatever sort of strategy plan we're coming up with? One, people are so grateful that you asked, because a lot of the times they'll get left behind.
Yeah.
And you can get some really incredible insights into sort of how people think about their roles and how people think about the organization and what they're doing just by opening it up with those two questions.
That is such an amazing insight. Yes. And I would share that that you should, if for those of you that are out there listening, whether you're working with nonprofits or bigger companies, I think that's what that's what helps other people know that you're moving from a junior kind of mid-level career into that more senior staff level
Hmm.
consultant type career, that that you're taking the time to ask those questions. Not only, I think that's such an amazing insight of, don't just ask leadership, but ask the people that are frontline too. What is going to make your life easier? What can I
Hmm.
do to make your life easier?
Frontline has all the hot gossip. Go to the front line.
Yes,
Ask them what's going on.
they do. And often have such a great pulse on what the customers are actually thinking and
Yep.
doing. Um, yeah, and sales groups are so incredible about that.
Yeah, I imagine.
So awesome. Uh, we're we've talked a lot, so I'm just going to try and run through some of these other questions. May skip some.
Okay.
Um, what are some of the people challenges in getting nonprofits to really embrace data?
So one is there's 100,000 other things to do at all times. Um,
Yeah.
Particularly in this climate, if you are a nonprofit organization that gets federal funding and
Mhm.
you are not sure if you are on the chopping block for those funds, um, everything is on fire right now.
Yeah.
So data may not be your highest priority, and maybe right now it shouldn't be. That's okay. Um, but that is a pretty consistent challenge of I have 4,000 other fires to put out. I don't know where this fits in because data is sort of a longer term investment. It takes time to build it. It takes time to see and be able to use the results. There are a lot of skills that have to be built um, to be able to clearly see the benefit. So that's one piece of it. Another piece that I have found is that a lot of folks go into the sector because they want to help people
Mhm.
and they want to do it a certain way. So you've got a lot of lawyers in the nonprofit sector who are bringing civil suits and all kinds of different things, um, doing legislative work, stuff like that. You've got a lot of social workers who are coming in to work directly with clients or to run community health programs, all those things. So all of these folks are coming in with specific types of educational backgrounds, specific types of perspectives, how they understand their role, kind of work that they do. And data maybe doesn't always enter the conversation, right?
Mhm.
I am an attorney. I do this. I'm picking on attorneys because I'm married to one, and I've worked for a lot of legal organizations. So, like, this is how I operate. This is how I work. These are my tasks. What do I care about the numbers? That's not my job.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, the other big challenge that I think I've had in the past is there might be a couple people on board with strengthening the data, but when you got to get broader buy-in, trying to make the data relevant for that person in their job, even if they're not really going to be using the data a ton. Um, just getting them on board with like what role that they might have if it's a data entry thing. Well, this is really important because.
Yeah.
So those would be the two things. It's just stretched, everybody's stretched, and it doesn't necessarily align with what you came in the sector to do.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's awesome. Um, okay, so I want to get into some of the kind of tools and the systems that you see in nonprofits. So, what are some of the tools and platforms that you might recommend for somebody that's looking to get into the space?
There's a lot of Excel. I
Mhm.
know that's not exciting, but it's a lot of Excel. Um, you will there's sort of a niche industry of tech companies that provide certain types of tools to nonprofit organizations. Most commonly, it is for fundraising and development. So tracking donations, tracking major donor campaigns, doing capital campaigns. It may also serve as like a communications system manager, depending on the type that you get. Salesforce does some of this. Neon is another one. I'm blanking on some of the others, but that's sort of one common type of system that you will see. And you will see for certain roles that they do want you to have some experience with whatever fundraising platform that they're using. There are other sorts of tools that are sold to nonprofits that will help, tracking voter information in the area if you're doing sort of legislative advocacy stuff. Some for communications, some for marketing. Financial tools can vary a lot. I know it's not a particularly helpful answer because it is kind of all over the place,
Yeah.
but I think it does help to kind of get familiar with the companies. Blackbout is a major one, that create these kinds of tools. It's a little hard to get access to them if you're not already in an organization, which is not ideal if it's something you're interested in going into. But they're out there. It's a little niche. A lot of it is focused on fundraising. A lot of data work is focused on fundraising in the sector. So getting familiar with that, I think, is helpful.
That makes sense, and definitely different than working with an enterprise or mid market or for any for profit company.
Mhm.
Even from that financial system standpoint, like I think from an enterprise standpoint, like it's Oracle, NetSuite, it's those big players, right?
Yeah.
And you don't see a whole lot of anything else. But yeah, and then with small business, like it's almost exclusively like QuickBooks, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I can imagine that there's probably a huge space for other companies to come in and offer that for nonprofits in particular.
And I think it's getting bigger. One place to go if folks are interested, I don't want to forget to shout them out, is an organization called N10, NTEN. What does it stand for? I always mess this up. Okay, the Nonprofit Technology Enterprise Network. They do a fabulous conference every year for all different kinds of tech people who work in the nonprofit space to come together, attend workshops, network, share problems, share challenges, share solutions. And a lot of the major companies that do offer tech solutions to nonprofits are at that conference. Next year, it's going to be in Detroit. It's usually in April. If you are someone who is thinking about the sector, it is well worth it, in my opinion, to go.
And it looks like the next, because I looked it up when you said it, because I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. March 16th through 18th, 2026 in Detroit.
Yep.
Does that sound right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody out there that's looking for a conference to go to, that sounds like
Yeah.
a neat conference to go to. That's awesome. Very cool. So let's see. What? Oh, now this next question that I was getting ready to ask does really pairs well with Nikhil's question about how do you guys upskill yourself apart from jobs? And the question I was going to ask is how technical do nonprofit data teams get, and where is that sweet spot for upskilling?
So they can get technical, again, I think depending on the size and how much folks are doing in-house. If you want to work for a hospital, hospitals are under HIPAA and other sorts of privacy laws. We're going to get technical at the big hospital. For a smaller grassroots organization, it's not going to be very technical at all. Across the board, what I have found with nonprofit organizations is that if you find a course, a certificate program, something that you would like to take to upskill yourself, they will be 1,000% supportive of whatever it is you want to do. There may or may not be funding to cover the cost of that upskilling. But they will usually try to throw in a little something. It is very much up to you as the individual to find the opportunities. I think especially if you're in the data end of things. Attorneys have their professional organizations, social workers have their professional organizations that are geared toward the nonprofit sectors. N10 might be the closest for the data folks. So your upskilling is, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Upskilling is very much up to you and what you want to learn and what you want to do. And the organization will probably be supportive. It's an open question as to whether or not they'll cover the cost of that for you.
That makes sense. So I do want to ask, kind of leading into that piece of, I know from my end, it could be kind of all this could be all over the place. So from a visualization tool standpoint, like, is it mostly Excel from a nonprofit in nonprofits? Do you get a chance to use something like a Tableau or a Power BI? Or
I think Tableau is becoming increasingly common as a data visualization tool. It is a lot of Excel. Sometimes Canva.
Okay.
We can get a little wild with those infographics. If we could all just settle down a little bit, I would be appreciative.
Yeah.
I think, but with these tools that are becoming more common, I think people are interested in the visualization piece, but the skills as to what makes a good visualization, what makes a visualization easy to understand, that effectively gets your point across. Like, those would be some of the upskill pieces that would need to happen. A lot of the times we're just sort of doing the software and pressing the button and, okay, looks good. We'll stick it in the report. But there is an art to it that probably doesn't get discussed as much as it should.
Yes. And I think that I have friends that are senior BI people, and they're like, please, for the love of God, stop doing pie charts. Like that's
Never.
the big visualization sin of, please stop doing pie charts. I'm like,
that's so funny.
Too funny. Awesome. So let's see. What advice would you give to someone that's interested in looking at doing nonprofit data work?
So the first thing that you really have to figure out for yourself is, what do you care about? It's really important, if you're going to go into the nonprofit sector, to work for a place that does things that you think are important, because it's an important part of the culture. We want people to come in who really care about environmental. We want people who are coming in who are really passionate about protecting civil liberties. You got to find your thing. From there, you can start to look into organizations that are doing those things. Read up on them, read their annual reports. Make sure that if you want to do an informational interview, make sure you're really prepared to have those conversations. That's going to make people really receptive to the sort of skills and the kind of, talents that you can bring into their organization. That would be one of the top things that I would suggest, because that alignment is going to be really important. Definitely reach out to people, build your network. You can do with your places like N10. A lot of cities have sort of young professional groups for people who work in nonprofits. See if there's one in your area. You can find some folks to talk to about what the day-to-day is like. Be prepared to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. And I would encourage, anybody that's not working enterprise, I think that's true. You have to be able to kind of rotate those hats. And I had a thought and it ran away. When you're talking about that, and I don't know, it'll come back to me in a second. So tell me, as we're kind of wrapping up here, tell me, where can people find you and learn more about you?
Sure. So the website is the-data-coach.com, because somebody already had the data coach and would not sell it to me, and that was rude. If you are looking for me, my email is lindsay@the-data-coach.com. We are on Facebook at Facebook and Instagram at the Data Coach 303. And you can also just search for my name on LinkedIn if you want to connect that way. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, lots
There's
of ways to get in touch.
Lindsay's or Lindsay's LinkedIn page. And here's her website, the data, like she said, the-data-coach.com. She has really an awesome website. I really like the way that it's laid out.
Shout out to Mandy Hop and the team at Hop Creative. I did not do this myself. I was in need of assistance. They did a great job.
That's also I am also in the process of getting somebody to revamp my website. So yes, I get it. I'm not the website person anymore. So and then obviously your YouTube.
Yes. Oh yeah, YouTube. You know, the thing that got this all started.
Yes.
That is also at the data coach.
Very cool. So what are maybe some final thoughts or resources that you want to share?
I would say if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat, whether you want to work in the sector or be a partner in the sector. You know, I'm happy to talk through your questions, your goals, things that you might be interested in doing. You know, through any of the ways that I just mentioned. You can find me in a lot of places. Be reflective on not just why you want to go into a sector, why you want to go into a certain organization, but think through how the skills that you have can really contribute to the organization. You may have to explain what that means as you're going in and doing interviews, because again, there's not necessarily a strong data background or culture at these places. So really be prepared to say, like, these are all the skills that I have, and this is how it's going to help you achieve your mission, how it's going to help you, you know, secure more funding and make the case to, you know, donors you haven't been able to access before, things like that. Again, communication is really key in the sector. Be an active listener, ask a lot of questions. Again, you probably have a lot of the tech skills that you already need. So really focus on the knowledge building and relationship piece.
Very cool. There is one last question that I do want to. We got people are starting to get active now that they realize. But this question I think is so important right now. About how AI impact it. The question is about how AI is going to impact data engineering jobs. But I would like, do you see much of an AI impact yet in that nonprofit organization? Do you see them trying to use AI to do different things because of maybe their budget constraints?
So I think some organizations are. I think it's kind of like individual people in other businesses, right? So people are really open to it, say, absolutely, let's get on board. Some people are interested but hesitant, and then other people are like, absolutely not, the robots are coming.
Yeah.
There is some work being done on helping nonprofits build an AI policy that they can clearly communicate how they're using AI and for what purpose to their community members, to their staff, rules and regulations about, you know, who's allowed to do what with what tool. But in a lot of cases, the AI is already here.
Yeah.
Right? It's built into the systems that we have been using. We just haven't necessarily been calling it AI.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of education to do on that front of like you're possibly using this more than you think. So let's think through a way that you can use this in an equitable fashion, in a way that maybe has a lower environmental impact, sort of whatever the concerns are that you have. Let's get that into writing and come up with some solutions to make it work for you and know that it's a living document.
Yeah. I think that's a good point with the environmental impact, just because of kind of the data centers that are being built. I hadn't thought about that from that perspective. That's awesome. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed this. I always love getting to talk to other data people because, I'm a big nerd, and this is what I love doing.
The nerds have to find each other because we can't just be out here in these streets.
Yeah, they don't. Nobody wants that. So awesome, and thank you all so much for coming on and being interactive with us tonight. I love some of these comments. I love the validation that, we do as data people all have some Salesforce trauma. There's always some great questions about AI. And as far as how AI is going to impact data engineering jobs, I really think that there might be a little bit of a slowness right now, but I think that there's actually going to create more data engineering jobs in the future because AI needs data in order to learn and to evolve. So,
Yep.
so I think that will eventually, we'll see that increase again. So awesome! Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed our conversation. Maybe we could have you on again sometime.
Absolutely.
But thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you again next week, where we are going to have Shane Gibson on, who has written an amazing book about. It's called The Information Canvas, and basically talking about kind of the requirement gathering and some of what Lindsay and I talked about tonight about how important it is to communicate with stakeholders and to actually listen to them and hear what they say. So incredibly excited to have that session next Friday, and I hope to see you all back here next Friday night at 10 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.